Welcome to Better Together, a Vaishnava family podcast.
A podcast where we talk about family life from a Bhakti yoga perspective. We are your hosts, Aksh.
And I'm Gopika. Welcome to episode 4. I'm really excited to record this episode because we have saved our conversation around this very juicy topic for the podcast. A week ago, I would like to say, there was a New York Times article released titled, "Where Did Justine Go? One Woman Lost to Devotion." And it was about this young woman who basically joined ISKCON, ended up serving on a Bhakti lounge type of preaching project in Philadelphia, and ends up leaving, even citing herself to be traumatized, even abused in her experience. And this article brought up so many feelings for me as a second generation Hare Krishna youth, and now as a parent with children that we want to raise in our faith. And I want to talk to you about it. And so I would love to know, after you read this article, what came up for you?
Well, I've been looking forward to this as well. I know you sent it to me a while back, and I finally had a chance to read it. A couple of things. I think, first of all, maybe a sense of embarrassment, if I'm honest. Sort of like, here we go again.
Yeah, totally.
I just feel, as of late, there's been a lot of press or PR around the Hare Krishnas.
Yeah.
Whether it's documentaries and articles and of different individuals, and it's never in a positive light.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. So that's been tough. Just, reading it and sort of having to take that in. I think what makes it worse is when you've grown up in the faith, it brings back memories of how that might have actually influenced the way you behaved growing up. And I know for me, I was very hush-hush about my faith, my practice for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think partly because of negativity around people's perception of the Hare Krishnas. And of course, the tradition is not called the Hare Krishnas, but that's what it goes by. But yeah, so many examples I could give, personal stories of how that's came up in my life as a child, as a young adult, even in college. So naturally, this kind of story just brings up some of those feelings again.
Yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying. When I read the article, I felt like I had like a knot in my chest as I read, even though I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think at this point in our spiritual journey, we are not naive to the fact that these things happen, but it actually it hurt me inside. And I think the reason is because this faith means so much to me, and the values and principles in our Bhakti tradition, they feel like my superpowers. They are the pillars that make me feel like I can do anything in the world. I can be empowered to serve others and society and my family. And to see these values and principles possibly used to mistreat people, potentially, like what happened in this case. And 2, to see them kind of misunderstood.
Yes.
Right? Because honestly, any religious institution, Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, any religious institution, there are going to be people who misapply religious principles and mistreat others. And so I'm not defending what happened here at all. I know that our ISKCON movement needs a lot of work, but it's just hard to be labeled as a cult because of those circumstances. We're not a cult. We're this ancient religion tradition that came for so many years ago But nobody calls Judaism, Christianity, Islam a cult when these things happen over there, But somehow as a Hare Krishnas, we're always a cult when these things happen. And it just makes me so upset. And I feel so grossly misunderstood.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Well, you dropped the C word.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, did they mention the word cult, or was that sort of...
Yeah, good point.
An impression?
They actually didn't mention the word cult. But again, I think this just speaks to trauma / the experience of, I feel like they were calling us a cult. I think actually in the article, they do briefly describe the fact that Hare Krishnas come from a 16th century religious tradition in India. However, when they go into the background and the orange robes and the airports and Prabhupada coming to the West, it's like, I don't know, it always just brings up for me that people are reading this and are being like, oh yeah, those weird people, the cult that came to America. So
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the cult label is interesting because it's very sticky. What I've been realizing as of late is it's almost like you don't even have to say it, right? But it's sort of an impression that maybe people have had. I don't know how much young people have it today, but certainly even in this article, I think they use the term newer religion or something like that, which, well, I always feel is misrepresenting, because when they say that, what they're saying is it's something that came about just in the last century with Prabhupada coming to the West, which is not where Bhakti started at all. I feel like there's a bit of lack of almost proper investigation on the part of the writing in some ways.
Or not investigation, but the way they describe it. The emphasis is not on this historic religious tradition and people potentially misusing or, not following the principles properly. The emphasis is on this story of Prabhupada coming to the West and people leaving their homes and joining the temples and all of that, you know?
Yeah. So I was also feeling that it was quite sad. I mean, you mentioned the point about misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up for me was even in the title, it said something like disappearing into devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And there's clearly this sense that, Justine lost herself in the process somehow. And I was just thinking that that's such a sad state of affairs because we're a personalist tradition that values and celebrates the individual, and somehow her experience, but also the way that the article then portrays the tradition and the practice and the institution is almost monistic in a sense, in that it's almost about disappearing into some divinity and not retaining your individuality, which is quite the opposite of what we stand for. So I think somehow it's such a mismatch of what maybe her experience was and then how the article wrote it versus what our philosophy is, which is quite sad and tells you that the experience of the philosophy is more important than the philosophy itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think at one point she writes to her father from India.
Yeah.
And I think when she was in Philadelphia, she writes, "I wish you could see how my heart has changed, how it is open to the world around me in a beautiful way. I am happier and more content than ever." The thing is, that is an amazing statement, but the way that it's then portrayed is that, maybe she was, hypnotized into it because she ends up leaving, feeling abused at the end of it, and she finds this person. It portrays that, she met the devotees at this Bhakti lounge that was meant to attract quote-unquote Westerners, and so it was like a show. They allure these Westerners and make them feel really special and then get them to plug into the project and they mistreat them. And so she was duped.
Okay.
You know, so I think that's what I took when they were trying to say disappears into devotion.
Yeah.
Like, and that to me was the tragedy of it, because it's possible that this woman, Justine, had a real spiritual experience.
Yeah.
That she actually connected with Krishna, that she felt something
Yeah.
when chanting. But again, I agree with your point, right? Her experience of interacting with the devotees and actually how the service practically played out, right? How she ended up practicing Krishna consciousness on a day-to-day affairs totally changed her experience. And that experience that might have been genuine spiritual connection, now she sees it as spiritual abuse or like being tricked. And she's still, I think the article is saying she's still trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah. Well, do
Yeah.
you think that there was a difference maybe between her first set of experiences and her later ones? In the
Yeah.
sense that, maybe through the Bhakti Lounge, it was maybe just a more looser sort of experience and less rules and
Yeah.
rituals and that sort of thing. And then it seems like things kind of progressed, and I guess from what I understand, I think she also took to the path, took initiation.
Yeah.
So pretty serious commitment
Yeah.
in that sense. And then from that, it's almost like now you've kind of put both feet in the pool, so to say. And now her experience of that was different. I don't know. Do you agree that there was like this kind of first phase and the second phase?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's hard to know. There's so many factors that can go into somebody's changed spiritual experience, right? Like
Yeah.
honeymoon period is commonly described for people who first experience Krishna consciousness, and then as time goes on, they see the realities of different things. And also, Krishna consciousness, chanting the holy name is not necessarily going to be always happy, right?
Mm.
Like, yes, it connects us to Krishna, chant and be happy. That is all true, but the process of cleansing your heart and bringing up unwanted things could also surface other things. At the same time, I do agree that the situation, though, that she moved into was quite intense. I mean, apparently you were reported for eating chocolate. And if that were the case, I would have been kicked out many, many years ago, because I eat chocolate quite frequently. So
Yeah.
that's intense to me,
Yeah. It is. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was pretty crazy. But yeah, I guess curious about the experience because, you and we were part of doing some programming in college
Yeah.
with sharing Bhakti, and it was a great experience. Looking back, probably would have done some things differently.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I always go back and reflect on is, was I authentic enough in
Yeah.
how I presented my faith? Or did I try too much to mask it or present it in a different way to just meet the needs of that audience? And I have lots of thoughts on this now,
Yeah.
but that's probably for another discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the idea that like authenticity is an important virtue in today's world. And my fear is that maybe at some level she may have felt like, or not. I don't know. I don't know, because then again, she did commit to the path, so it almost feels like maybe that strategy worked for her in terms of getting her introduced to something that's a bit culturally foreign and then taking to it seriously. Maybe it was the experience of being under someone later in that journey that changed things a bit.
Yeah. I mean, you say that you would do things differently, right? And I'm thinking back to in college, I think we were of the mindset of how can we persuade people in a certain way. Like there was a part of us that wanted people to not see the full picture, and it like gimmicky a little bit, not completely. But I think it's interesting that in some sense, even though we're not in college anymore, we're way past that, we have 2 little kids now, and we are attempting to share our faith that we have chosen, but they have not yet chosen for themselves yet. And so what did this article bring up for you in regards to parenting and how we want to raise our children as Hare Krishnas in this world, and in a world that often sees us as a cult?
Yeah, well, I hope not. I hope our children don't have to. They get some distance from that label by then. But yeah, I think for me, the first thing maybe that just comes up is having these difficult conversations with them and being open about it, and arming them with those discussions. The last thing I'd want to do is not talk about it and putting it under the rug, so to say.
Yeah.
I think being really honest, realistic about the path, and that it's something that every individual is going through in a different, unique journey. Therefore, a organization can have many people who are just different, and having that conversation.
Yeah. And also having conversations about other people and other people being imperfect, but also the fact that we are imperfect as devotees.
Yeah.
You know, that we struggle, that we have made mistakes in the past. You know, you said that you hope that our kids don't have to bear the shoulder. Not bear the shoulders. What am I saying? 10 o'clock at night.
It's late.
11 o'clock at night. Yeah. Bear the burden of the cult label. And yeah, I think also it's like, as parents, I know I feel like I have to continually still own and work through my own trauma, so I don't necessarily overcorrect and project it on them, because I think that's also an equal thing that can happen.
Yeah.
Like, we've grown up with like, oh, Hare Krishna's a cult, Hare Krishna's a cult. You almost like overcorrect to the point where it can be almost a turn off or distasteful in these conversations. So I think that's like another part of the conversation here for us, is being very aware that like, okay, this was my experience and this may not necessarily be their experience. And so while we do want to have proactive conversations with them, also giving them the space to be a Hare Krishna in their world and see what comes up for them.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, the other point that came up for me is thinking about even how we teach Bhakti. And what is Bhakti? Meaning, if what my child absorbs is that it's a set of practices and rituals and I have to do things a certain way, then to me that's obviously a misrepresentation of the practice, but it also sets them up for a really bad experience, because you have all the kind of things that they're going to go through teenager period and young adulthood that will, unfortunately, it may make them reject it, which is also understandable, but there's so much that it can offer them that is actually quite relevant. And so for me, when we're talking about teaching what Bhakti is, not only is it about the practices and maybe the rituals, but it's also about our internal state, how we are changed. It's experiential. And if our children can actually experience Krishna consciousness, even at a young age, in a way that's relevant to them, then they're not going to be as thrown off by these sort of challenges that come their way, and they'll be just more clearly grounded in how their spirituality is actually actively supporting their life.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think?
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think sometimes as parents, we face this pressure of like, training our children. And so they have to like, you know, learn the culture and learn the rules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like we should be really careful on how we navigate this idea of restriction. You know this and know that, and don't do this and don't do that, because there's so much of that. And rather than the no's, I personally would want to focus on the actual values that are underlying the restrictions.
Yeah.
So, you know, with the 4 regs, no meat eating, the why behind that is we are compassionate to all living things, right? I actually remember a couple years ago, I was connected with this one devotee youth who had like moved here, and she was like having a hard time in school and stuff. And somehow my mom connected me with her, and she was talking to me on the phone, and she was saying like, you know, it's so hard. I go to school, like I don't eat meat, you know, everybody else eats differently. Like, I don't know what to say. And so I asked her, why do you believe that we should not eat meat? And she was like, because Krishna would be upset with me if I ate meat.
Interesting.
And okay, maybe there's some truth to her statement, but I was like, but that's your reason? You know, her whole experience of the practices in Krishna consciousness was actually fear-based, you know? And I want our children to feel empowered by bhakti, not held back by it. So the idea that we can show compassion and kindness to not just animals by not eating them, but we should be doing that for all living entities.
Yeah.
And figuring out actually how in our lives as devotees we can practice compassion in other ways, right? Like the positive practices.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if our practice and experience of bhakti is just about the ritual and rules, it almost can harden the heart in one sense. And kids can either get turned off by it or even perhaps develop a sense of superiority. That our way is the best way, and these are the rules. This is my operating system of how the world has to work, and everybody needs to follow it my way, which I think is equally as troublesome, right?
Yeah.
So I really hope that we can help them connect to those superpowers in our tradition. And also, I really feel like it's important for them to understand that these are our values, but other people have different values. Right? Because even in our movement, for them to be able to interact with others, there's such diversity of how people in ISKCON relate to Krishna, right? And how they observe the practices and rituals. So just understanding that people are different and it's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Yeah. It's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock. This was great. I'm so happy we chatted about this finally.
Yeah.
And had a chance to process the article. There's so much more we can say, but I guess we'll leave it at, we're still talking about this and we're still working on it and we're still figuring it all out. And so here's to getting better together.
See you on the next episode.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.